I welcome you back to another cozy episode of Background Historian. I hope this new year has been gracious to you and that the rest of this year treats you well. Before we begin, feel free to comment where you're watching from and what time it is for you there. Now, as always, settle in, stop the doom scrolling, and get ready to drift into your slumber. I invite you to imagine this as tonight's story, one meant not to hurry anywhere, not to prove anything, but simply to unfold. We are going to wander through Native American tribal rituals, not as a checklist of ceremonies or a textbook summary, but as lived moments. Moments shaped by land, seasons, humor, repetition, boredom, awe, and the quiet patience that comes from watching the same stars every night for thousands of years. As I begin, I want to be clear about one thing. This is not a story told from above or from a distance. It is told from close to the ground, from where feet touch soil and hands touch stone. I speak as a listener, a carrier of memory, someone sitting near the edge of the circle rather than standing at the center. And as we move through these rituals together, I will sometimes reach forward into our own modern lives, with our glowing phones, our coffee addictions, our group chats, our alarm clocks that feel like tiny enemies. Not to mock the past, but to remind us how familiar it all still is. Because ritual at its heart is not strange. It is repetition with meaning. And if we are honest, we are surrounded by it today. Think about how you start your morning. Maybe you reach for your phone before your eyes are fully open. Maybe you brew coffee in the same way every day, measuring grounds without thinking, pressing the same buttons, waiting for the same sound. Maybe you tie your shoes in a specific order, or always sit in the same chair, or feel unsettled when your routine is disrupted. These small acts are not so far removed from older rituals than we like to believe. They ground us. They reassure us. They tell us who we are and where we belong. Native American tribal rituals did the same thing, only with more sky involved. These rituals were not performed for spectacle. They were woven into daily life, seasonal cycles, and community survival. Some were quiet and private, done alone at dawn. Others were loud, communal, and long enough to make your legs ache and your voice go hoarse. They marked births and deaths, planting and harvest, healing and grief, war and peace, adolescence and old age. They explained the world long before explanations were written down. And just as importantly, they gave people something to do together when the world felt uncertain. Which, if we are being honest, is most of the time. Tonight's series will be personal. Not because I will claim experiences that are not mine, but because I will walk you through these rituals as if you are there beside me, sitting cross-legged on packed earth, standing in cold water that numbs your ankles, waiting, listening, wondering if you are doing it right, wondering if anyone else feels awkward too, wondering when the food will be ready, wondering occasionally why you agreed to this in the first place. Because yes, even in deeply spiritual moments, humans are still humans. There were children who fidgeted during ceremonies, elders who nodded off mid-chant, teenagers who rolled their eyes at yet another lesson from the ancestors. There were jokes whispered at the edge of the fire. There were mistakes. There were moments when someone definitely messed up the rhythm and everyone pretended not to notice. Ritual did not require perfection. It required presence. And presence is something we struggle with today. We live in a world of constant interruption. Notifications buzz, tabs multiply, attention fractures. Even when we try to relax, we often do it while half scrolling, half listening, half thinking about tomorrow. Native American rituals asked for something radical. They asked you to be here, fully, with your body, your breath, your senses, with the wind on your skin and smoke in your clothes, with hunger, fatigue, anticipation, and patience. That does not mean these rituals were always solemn or heavy. Many were joyful, many were playful. Some involved storytelling that wandered wildly off course. Some involved dances that went on long enough for everyone to quietly agree that yes, this was impressive, but also exhausting. Some involved food that took hours to prepare and seconds to disappear, followed by the kind of communal satisfaction we still chase today when a group meal actually works out. And sometimes rituals were simply practical. They taught skills. They reinforced values. They reminded people how to live with the land rather than against it. They encoded ecological knowledge in songs and movements: when to plant, when to move, when to wait, when to stop, and importantly, when to gather together and acknowledge that no one survives alone. Over the next 10 parts, each long and unhurried, we will move gently through different kinds of rituals. Coming-of-age ceremonies that tested patience more than strength. Healing rituals that involved both medicine and belief. Seasonal rituals tied to animals, stars, and cycles older than any calendar app. War and protection rituals that balanced fear with courage. Death rituals that made space for grief without rushing it away. Each part will linger. Each will be slow. Each will be at least 2,000 words, because rushing a ritual defeats the purpose. And every part will end softly, easing us forward rather than snapping us into the next moment. Tonight, in this introduction, I ask only that you settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day loosen its grip. Imagine the fire crackling low. Imagine the sound of footsteps on earth rather than pavement. Imagine a world where time moves in circles instead of straight lines. And if, at any point, your mind drifts, that is perfectly fine. Rituals were built with drifting in mind. You can always rejoin the circle when you are ready. As the night deepens, we will begin part 1, stepping quietly into the earliest rhythms of ritual life, where story, survival, and spirituality were never separate things. For now, rest here. The story will wait for you. As the fire settles into a steady, breathing glow, I find myself thinking about beginnings. Not beginnings marked by dates or announcements, but the quieter kind. The kind that happen when someone steps into a pattern that already exists, something older than memory, something that does not need to introduce itself. This is where ritual begins, not with a drumbeat or a chant, but with repetition, with waking up and doing what has always been done, with the slow understanding that the world is not random, even when it feels unpredictable. The sun rises, the seasons turn, animals move, people follow, and somewhere in that steady movement, meaning forms. In many Native American communities, ritual did not sit apart from daily life. It was not something you put on like a costume and then remove when it was finished. It lived in the way water was gathered, in the way food was shared, in the way stories were told at night when there was nothing left to do but listen. Ritual was the shape of living itself. I imagine waking before the sun, the air still cool, the ground holding onto the night. There is no alarm clock screaming into existence. There is only light, changing slowly enough that you barely notice it until it is already there. Someone stirs nearby. A fire is coaxed back to life. Smoke drifts upward in a thin, familiar ribbon. This alone is a ritual. Today, we wake to buzzing phones and glowing screens. We check the time, the weather, the news, the opinions of strangers, all before our feet touch the floor. Back then, the first information of the day came from the world itself. The temperature of the air, the direction of the wind, the sound of birds. These were not background details. They were messages. Ritual trained people to notice. One of the earliest lessons taught through ritual was attention. Not the sharp, anxious kind we practice now, constantly scanning for updates, but a wide, patient attention. The kind that notices patterns over time. The kind that understands that what happens today matters, but what happens every day matters more. Children learned this without being told they were learning. They watched adults perform the same actions again and again. They listened to the same stories, sometimes word for word, sometimes with small changes that only made sense years later. Repetition was not boring. It was reassuring. It said, "You are still here. The world still works." There were rituals tied to the day itself. Morning actions performed in a certain order. Words spoken softly or not at all. Water touched with intention. Food prepared in ways that honored where it came from. None of this was rushed. There was no concept of multitasking. You did one thing and you did it fully. If someone had tried to eat while scrolling through something imaginary, the idea would have seemed absurd. Eating was eating. Listening was listening. Being present was not a goal. It was the default. Of course, that does not mean people were always calm or enlightened. There was impatience. There was boredom. There were moments of wondering why things had to be done this way again. Anyone who has ever watched a child forced to sit still knows that humans have not changed as much as we like to think. But ritual gave shape to that impatience, contained it. It said, "You may not understand this now, but stay anyway. Watch anyway. One day it will make sense." Many rituals were tied to the land itself. The ground beneath your feet was not just a surface. It was a living participant. Certain places held specific meanings. A bend in a river, a clearing among trees, a hill where the wind behaved differently. These locations were returned to again and again, not because they were convenient, but because they were familiar. Returning mattered. Today, we rarely return to the same physical place with intention. We move constantly. We upgrade. We relocate. We chase novelty as if it were nourishment. Ritual did the opposite. It asked people to deepen rather than widen. To know one place well instead of many places poorly. Standing in the same spot year after year, you begin to notice small changes. The way the light shifts slightly earlier or later. The way certain plants grow more strongly after certain winters. The way animals behave when something is about to change. Ritual sharpened perception over generations. And then there were the stories. Stories were not entertainment in the modern sense. They were not something to half listen to while doing something else. They were instruction, memory, warning, and comfort all at once. Told at night, when the body naturally slows, stories entered the mind in a different way. They did not demand attention. They invited it. I imagine sitting near the edge of a circle, listening to a voice that knows exactly when to pause. The fire pops softly. Shadows move. The story is familiar, but that does not make it less powerful. In fact, it makes it stronger. Each telling adds another layer, another understanding, another quiet realization that you did not have last time. Today, we binge stories. We rush through them. We consume entire seasons of meaning in a weekend, then wonder why nothing sticks. Ritual storytelling refused to hurry. Some stories were told only at certain times of year. Some were not told at all unless conditions were right. This was not gatekeeping. It was respect. Certain knowledge required readiness. Rituals also taught people how to wait. Waiting is a skill that has almost vanished. We fill every pause. We eliminate silence. We speed up playback. We track progress bars. But many rituals involved long stretches of waiting. Waiting for the sun to reach a certain point. Waiting for a sign. Waiting for someone to finish speaking, even if it took a while to get there. Waiting created space for reflection. It gave the mind time to wander, to question, to settle. It allowed emotions to surface naturally rather than being pushed aside. In a world without constant distraction, inner experience was not something to escape. It was something to learn from. There were also rituals of preparation. Before important moments, people prepared themselves physically and mentally. This might involve fasting, bathing, isolation or silence, not as punishment but as clearing, removing excess so that what mattered could be felt more clearly. Today, we prepare by checking lists, charging devices, packing snacks. There is nothing wrong with that, but it rarely touches the deeper layers of readiness. Ritual preparation asked a different question. Are you open to change? Are you paying attention? Are you willing to be uncomfortable for a while? These preparations often began long before the ritual itself. Days or weeks of subtle adjustment, eating differently, speaking less, spending more time alone, not because solitude was holy, but because it was instructive. When distractions fall away, what remains becomes louder. Sometimes that was wisdom, sometimes it was anxiety, sometimes it was both. Ritual did not promise comfort, promised meaning. Communal rituals were especially powerful. They reminded people that individual experience was part of something larger. Moving together, singing together, eating together, mourning together. Celebration and grief were not private burdens. They were shared responsibilities. I think about how strange it is that today, some of our most emotional moments happen alone, in front of screens. We cry quietly at videos. We celebrate silently with notifications. Ritual pulled emotion into the open, said, "This matters enough to be witnessed." That did not mean everyone felt the same thing. It meant everyone showed up. Even humor had a place. There were moments when things went wrong. When someone stumbled, when a voice cracked, when a child laughed at the wrong moment. These were not disasters. They were reminders that ritual was lived by humans, not ideals. I imagine someone suppressing a smile during a solemn moment, the same way we do today when something serious is interrupted by a completely inappropriate thought. That human impulse to notice the absurd never disappears. Ritual did not try to erase it. It absorbed it. In many ways, ritual was an agreement to pause, to mark time, to remember what mattered before the world became loud again. It was a way of saying, we are here now, together, and this moment deserves our full presence. As the fire burns lower, the sounds soften. Night deepens. Somewhere nearby, someone adjusts their position, settling in more comfortably. No one rushes to the next thing. There is nowhere else to be. This is the rhythm that shaped ritual life. Slow, repeating, grounded. Not dramatic, but profound in its consistency. And as we sit with it, letting it sink into the quiet spaces of the mind, it becomes clear that ritual was never about the past. It was about staying awake to the present. The fire continues to glow, steady and patient, and with it, the understanding that this way of moving through the world is still available to us, if we are willing to slow down enough to notice it. If you're still with us, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, as it helps me greatly to keep producing nightly episodes for you all. Let's back into it. The day does not announce itself loudly. It arrives the way it always has, through light and temperature and subtle shifts that only make sense if you are paying attention. I am learning that this attentiveness is not a talent so much as a habit, one taught patiently over time. Ritual lives here, in these quiet cues, in the agreement to notice what the world is already saying. As the sun climbs higher, the work of the day begins, and with it, another layer of ritual that does not look ceremonial at first glance. There are no dramatic gestures, no formal opening words, just movement that has been repeated often enough to carry meaning on its own. Gathering food is one of the most ritualized acts of all, even when it pretends to be practical. Hands move in familiar patterns. Tools are handled with care that borders on affection. There is an unspoken understanding that this is not just about eating. It is about relationship. Plants are not resources in the abstract sense. They are known individually, where they grow, when they appear, how they respond to rain or drought. Harvesting is done with awareness, sometimes with words spoken aloud, sometimes silently. Gratitude is not an emotional flourish. It is an acknowledgement of exchange. I imagine kneeling in the dirt, fingers brushing leaves aside, feeling the texture of soil that has been worked by generations before. There is no rush, no clock ticking loudly in the background. The plant is taken when it is ready, not when it is convenient. Compare this to how we shop today. Fluorescent lights, endless options, packages shouting claims at us. We grab without seeing. We eat without remembering. We throw away without thinking. The ritual has not disappeared. It has just become empty. Here, gathering food requires patience. You cannot scroll while you do it. You cannot hurry a plant into readiness. You must align yourself with something outside your control. This alone reshapes the mind. Hunting carries its own rituals, heavier and more complex. Before the hunt, there may be silence. Preparation that feels almost ceremonial even when no one names it as such. Tools are checked carefully. Bodies are prepared. Minds are steadied. There is respect here, too. Not romanticized, not sentimental, but real. Taking a life is never casual. Ritual surrounds it to make sure it does not become casual. There are words spoken to the animal. There are gestures that acknowledge what has been given. There is a shared understanding that survival does not excuse forgetfulness. Today, most of us encounter meat as a product, wrapped and sanitized, far removed from its origins. The emotional distance is convenient. Ritual closed that distance. It insisted on awareness, even when awareness was uncomfortable. And yet, even in these serious moments, there is room for humor. Someone inevitably trips over a root. Someone else swears quietly. Someone forgets something important and has to go back, drawing good-natured teasing. Humans remain humans, no matter how sacred the context. I think of how today we treat preparation for important moments. We panic pack. We triple-check chargers. We forget the one thing we actually need.
Anxiété replace intention.
Ritual preparation, by contrast, slows anxiety down. It gives nerves something to do. It channels energy into familiar actions. As the day unfolds, communal work becomes another ritual in itself. Tasks are shared, not because everyone enjoys cooperation, but because survival depends on it. There is an understanding that no one does everything well. Strength is distributed. Work is not separated cleanly from social life. Conversation flows naturally alongside effort. Stories are told. Advice is given casually. Children are present, watching, absorbing, occasionally being corrected, occasionally being indulged. This is how knowledge moves forward, not through formal instruction alone, but through proximity, through seeing how things are done when no one is performing. Modern life often isolates learning into sterile environments. Classrooms, tutorials, step-by-step guides watched at double speed. Ritual learning is slower and messier. It allows for mistakes. It allows for questions that are not answered immediately. I imagine a child watching an elder work, asking why something is done a certain way. The answer may come now, or it may come years later, when the child is finally ready to understand it. Not all knowledge is meant to be consumed instantly. There are rituals of rest, too. Pauses built into the day. Moments when work stops, not because it is finished, but because stopping is necessary. Sitting together in shade, sharing food, watching the land breathe. Today, rest feels earned only after exhaustion. We treat it like a reward rather than a requirement. Ritual rest acknowledges limits without shame. Bodies are not machines to be optimized. They are living things that need cycles. As afternoon drifts on, attention turns toward preparation for the evening. Fires are tended. Food is readied. Spaces are arranged in ways that feel natural rather than decorative. There is no sense of performance, only readiness. I think about how much effort we put today into making things look right rather than feel right. Filters, aesthetics.
Curata moments.
Ritual cares less about appearance and more about alignment. Does this space support what we are about to do? That is the only question that matters. Evening brings a shift in energy. The world softens. Sounds change. The day's labor recedes without fully disappearing. This is when some of the most important rituals take place, not because night is mystical by default, but because darkness changes how humans relate to one another. Stories return here, but now they feel different. The body is tired. The mind is more open. The fire draws attention inward. Words land more deeply. These stories are not told to impress. They are told to remind, to pass on memory, to anchor identity. Characters appear again and again. Their flaws are well known. Their mistakes are not hidden. Wisdom is conveyed through narrative rather than instruction. I think about how today we consume wisdom in bite-sized quotes, stripped of context, floating free of the stories that gave them meaning. Ritual storytelling refuses that separation. Lessons are embedded in lives, not slogans. Children drift closer to sleep as stories continue. No one forces attentiveness. Absorption happens naturally. Memory forms quietly. The story does its work whether or not anyone is consciously trying to learn from it. There are rituals of gratitude woven throughout these moments. Not dramatic declarations, but acknowledgments. Food shared, fire tended, space respected. Gratitude is not performative. It is practical, keeps relationships intact. Contrast this with how often we rush through meals today, half present, half elsewhere, barely tasting what sustains us. Ritual insists on presence. It does not demand reverence in the abstract. It asks for attention in the concrete. As the fire burns lower, people settle. Bodies find familiar positions. The ground holds warmth from the day. The sky stretches overhead, vast and indifferent and deeply known. There is no rush to fill silence. Silence is part of the ritual. It allows the mind to wander without being pulled in 1,000 directions. It allows emotions to surface gently rather than violently. I think about how uncomfortable silence has become for us. How quickly we reach for sound, distraction, noise. Ritual trains comfort with quiet. It teaches that nothing bad happens when nothing happens. Before sleep, there may be small personal rituals, quiet moments of reflection, simple actions done the same way each night. These are not announced. They are inherited, learned through watching rather than instruction. Lying down, the body knows what to do. The day has followed a pattern that feels complete. There is satisfaction not because everything was perfect, but because it was coherent. Sleep comes without negotiation. No doom scrolling. No mental replay of unfinished tasks. Tomorrow will come when it comes. The cycle will continue. Ritual, in this sense, is not a special event. It is the structure that makes life intelligible. It holds the day together from morning light to nightfall. It gives shape to effort and rest alike. As I let my thoughts settle, I realize how much of this we have lost not because it no longer works, but because we convinced ourselves we did not need it. We replaced rhythm with speed, presence with productivity, meaning with efficiency, and yet the hunger for ritual remains. We see it in our routines, our habits, our attempts to create structure in a world that rarely slows down. We light candles. We create morning routines. We invent traditions out of thin air because something in us remembers what it feels like to live inside a pattern that makes sense. The fire has burned low now. The night is deep. There is nothing left to do but rest. The ritual of the day has completed itself. not with an ending, but with a pause. And in that pause, there is a quiet understanding. Life does not need to be constantly explained to be meaningful. Sometimes it only needs to be lived with attention, one repeated gesture at a time. There comes a moment in every life when the world shifts its expectations. Not suddenly, not with an announcement, but with a quiet pressure that builds over time. A sense that the way you have been moving through the world no longer quite fits. Ritual steps in here gently but firmly to guide that change. Growing up within a community shaped by ritual means you are never unaware that transformation is coming. You watch it happen to others long before it happens to you. You notice how someone is treated differently after a certain moment, how their posture changes, how expectations adjust, how jokes land differently. No one has to explain it outright. You feel it in the air. Coming-of-age rituals are among the most powerful, not because they are dramatic, but because they are unavoidable. They say clearly and without apology, you are not staying the same forever. And they do so in a way that acknowledges fear, resistance, and uncertainty as part of the process rather than signs of failure. I imagine being young and aware that something is approaching, not knowing exactly when, but knowing it will come. A mix of anticipation and dread, excitement tangled with the desire to stay exactly where you are. This feeling is not ancient. It is deeply familiar. Today we mark growing up in strange ways. Birthdays with candles, legal thresholds that unlock responsibilities whether we feel ready or not. Graduation ceremonies that feel both climactic and strangely hollow. We are told we are adults, but rarely shown what that actually means. Ritual once filled that gap. Preparation for these moments often began long before the ritual itself. There were changes in behavior, expectations subtly raised. More responsibility, more observation, less tolerance for certain mistakes. This was not cruelty, it was calibration. The community was saying, we see what you are becoming. There might be a period of separation, time spent alone or with a small group undergoing the same transition. Silence could be part of this, or fasting, or learning specific skills, not to prove toughness but to strip away distractions. Isolation sounds frightening to modern ears. We equate being alone with being abandoned. But ritual isolation was not neglect. It was containment, a way to listen to oneself without interruption. A way to discover what remains when external validation disappears. I imagine sitting quietly, removed from the familiar noise of daily life. No constant input. No one asking how you feel every 5 minutes. Just time, just thoughts, just sensations. At first, the mind rebels. It looks for distraction. It invents worries. It remembers embarrassing moments. Plans imaginary conversations. Anyone who has ever tried to meditate for more than 30 seconds knows this phase well. Then, gradually, something shifts. The mental noise loses urgency. Sensations become more noticeable. Hunger, fatigue, curiosity, fear. Bride. All of it surfaces without being immediately labeled or managed. Ritual creates a container for this experience. It says these feelings are not problems to solve. They are information. Skills taught during these transitions are practical and symbolic at once. How to hunt, how to prepare food, how to care for others, how to endure discomfort without panic, how to listen more than you speak. Today, we often outsource these lessons to the internet. How-to videos, productivity hacks, life advice delivered in 30-second clips. We are drowning in information and starving for wisdom. Ritual wisdom comes slowly. It arrives through doing, failing, trying again. Through watching someone more experienced make it look effortless and realizing, with both admiration and frustration, that it is not effortless at all. There is often a moment during these rites when doubt peaks, when exhaustion sets in, When the question arises quietly but insistently, why am I doing this? This is not a flaw in the ritual. It is the point. The moment you question the process is the moment you are forced to engage with it consciously, to decide whether to continue, to find meaning not because it was handed to you, but because you chose to carry it. I think about how rare this is today. How many transitions we pass through without ever being asked to pause and choose. We drift from one stage to another, collecting responsibilities without reflection, wondering later why we feel disconnected from our own lives. Ritual does not allow drifting. It insists on awareness, even when awareness is uncomfortable. There is usually a return, a reintegration, the moment when the individual comes back into the community changed, even if the change is subtle. This is not a private transformation. It is witnessed. People look at you differently, not dramatically, just enough for you to notice. Expectations shift. Trust is extended. Responsibility increases. This is not always pleasant. Being seen as capable means being held accountable. Ritual does not promise ease. Promises belonging with expectations attached. I imagine the strange mix of pride and pressure that comes with this recognition. The realization that you cannot retreat to childhood without consequence. That you are now part of the structure that holds the community together. Today, many of us long for recognition without responsibility. We want to be validated but not burdened. Ritual ties the two together. You are acknowledged because you are needed. There is often celebration involved. Food shared, songs sung, laughter allowed to spill freely again after the intensity of preparation. The body relaxes. The tension releases. Celebration is not a reward. It is a release valve, a way to integrate the experience emotionally. Without it, transformation would remain raw and incomplete. I think about how today we often skip this step. We endure stress. We hit milestones. We immediately move on. Celebration feels indulgent or unnecessary. Ritual understands that without marking change, the psyche struggles to absorb it. Humor returns here in full force. Teasing. Stories retold with exaggeration. Small mistakes lovingly highlighted. The seriousness of the ritual is balanced by the reminder that no one is perfect. This balance matters. Without it, ritual becomes oppressive. With it, ritual becomes humane. There is also a lesson here about timing. Not everyone transitions at the same moment. Readiness is not standardized. Ritual accommodates this variability. It does not rush those who are not ready. It does not hold back those who are. Modern systems struggle with this nuance. We rely on age, credentials, timelines. Ritual relies on observation and judgment shaped by relationship. As night settles after such a day, there is a quiet satisfaction. Not relief that it is over, but a sense of alignment. Something has clicked into place. Sleep comes differently after transformation. Deeper, heavier. The body feels used in a meaningful way. The mind feels quieter. I think about how many people today struggle with sleep not because they are not tired, but because their days lack coherence. Ritual gives the day a shape that allows rest to arrive naturally. There are also quieter coming-of-age moments that never receive formal recognition. The first time someone cares for another without being asked. The first time fear is faced and survived. The first time loss is truly understood. Ritual does not always require ceremony. Sometimes it is simply the community noticing and adjusting accordingly. This attentiveness is something we have largely lost. We miss each other's transitions. We are surprised by changes that were happening in plain sight. Ritual teaches watching, teaches patience. It teaches respect for process rather than outcome. As I reflect on this, I am struck by how deeply we crave this kind of acknowledgement. How often we search for moments that tell us clearly you are different now. You are capable. You belong. We invent substitutes, career promotions, social media milestones, personal branding. None of these fully satisfy because they lack the depth of shared witness. Ritual is not about personal achievement. It is about communal integration. The fire burns steadily now, not flaring, not fading. The air feels settled. There is a sense that something important has happened, even if no one names it out loud. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of ritual. It allows change to happen without requiring constant explanation. It trusts that experience will speak for itself. In the quiet that follows, there is no need to rush forward, no need to prove anything. The transformation will reveal itself over time, in actions rather than declarations. The night holds this understanding gently. The world continues, and within that continuity, a new role quietly takes shape, supported by patterns older than any single life. There are moments when the body becomes the center of attention, not as an object to improve or optimize, but as a living signal, a place where imbalance shows itself before words ever could. Rituals of healing begin here, in the recognition that something is out of rhythm. Illness was never understood as purely mechanical. It was physical, yes, but also emotional, relational, spiritual. A cough might come from cold air, but it might also come from grief. Pain might follow injury, but it might also follow disconnection. Healing rituals did not separate these possibilities. They held them together. I imagine someone noticing that another person is moving differently, slower, quieter, less engaged. No appointment is scheduled. No form is filled out. Observation itself is the first diagnostic tool. Today, we rely on data, numbers, metrics, wearable devices that tell us how we slept, how we breathed, how many steps we took. There is comfort in this precision, but healing rituals relied on something else. Relationship. Someone sits beside you, listens to your voice, watches your eyes, notices what you are not saying. The body is read like a story rather than a chart. Healing often begins with separation, but not isolation. The sick person may be removed from regular duties, not as punishment, but as protection. Energy is conserved. Expectations soften. This is something we struggle with deeply today. We push through illness. We answer emails with fevers. We treat rest as weakness. Ritual healing insists on pause. Says your body needs space to speak. There may be cleansing involved. Water plays a central role. Bathing is not just hygiene. It is symbolic reset. The sensation of water on skin becomes a reminder of renewal. I imagine stepping into cool water, feeling it bite slightly, then soften. Breathing slows, muscles release. The mind follows the body into calm. Today, many of us shower quickly, distracted, thinking about what comes next. Ritual bathing asks for presence. It asks you to feel what is happening rather than rush through it. There are often plants involved. Roots, leaves, bark. Knowledge of these plants is accumulated carefully, passed down through demonstration rather than abstraction. What to use, when to harvest, how to prepare, how much is enough. This knowledge is relational. Plants are not interchangeable ingredients. They are known individually. They have personalities. Some are gentle. Some are powerful and must be handled with caution. I think about how casually we consume medicine today. Pills taken without thought. Side effects treated as footnotes. Ritual medicine demands awareness. It asks you to acknowledge what you are putting into your body. Healing rituals also involve sound. Chanting, singing, drumming. The rhythm is not decorative. It is functional. Sound organizes attention. It regulates breath. It brings the mind into alignment with the body. Anyone who has ever calmed themselves by humming knows this instinctively. We do it without thinking. Ritual formalizes it. The sound does not have to be beautiful. It has to be steady, predictable, reassuring. The body responds to rhythm before it responds to reason. Community presence is crucial. Healing does not happen alone. Even when the sick person rests, others are nearby. Someone tends the fire. Someone brings water. Someone keeps watch. This presence communicates something powerful. You are not a burden. You are worth time. Your healing matters to more than just you. Today, illness often isolates. We retreat into private suffering. We avoid being seen as needy. Ritual healing reverses this impulse. It brings vulnerability into the open. There is also storytelling involved. Stories of past healings, of ancestors who endured similar struggles. These stories do not promise outcomes. They promise continuity. I imagine listening to someone recount how another person once lay where I now lie, how they recovered, how life continued. Not as false reassurance, but as context. You are part of a longer story. Fear often accompanies illness. Ritual does not dismiss fear. It acknowledges it. Sometimes fear is spoken aloud. Sometimes it is addressed indirectly, through symbols and gestures. Modern medicine often treats fear as an obstacle, something to manage away. Ritual treats fear as information, a signal that something meaningful is happening. There are moments when healing rituals involve discomfort, heat, cold, pressure, movement, not as punishment but as stimulation. The body is reminded that it can respond. I think about how today we often avoid discomfort at all costs. Climate control, convenience, painkillers at the first hint of ache. Ritual healing understands that some discomfort is communicative. That does not mean suffering is glorified. There is a difference between purposeful challenge and unnecessary harm. Ritual knowledge includes this distinction. Time behaves differently in healing. There is no promise of speed. Progress is measured subtly. A slightly deeper breath, a steadier gaze, a return of appetite. Today we want timelines, recovery estimates, clear milestones. Ritual healing resists this demand. It trusts the body's intelligence. There may be moments of doubt, when symptoms linger, when improvement is slow. Ritual does not collapse under uncertainty. It continues steadily, adjusting as needed. This patience is perhaps one of the hardest lessons for modern minds. We are trained to expect immediate results. When they do not arrive, we assume failure. Ritual teaches endurance, says stay with the process. There is also humor in healing, gentle teasing, light moments that break tension. Laughter is not seen as disrespectful. It is seen as restorative. I imagine someone making a joke at exactly the wrong moment, followed by shared laughter that releases something tight in the chest. Healing is not solemn at all times. It is human. The healer is not positioned as an untouchable authority. They are experienced, yes, but also embedded in the community. Their role is relational rather than hierarchical. Today, we often place healers on pedestals, experts behind barriers. Ritual healers are accountable to those they serve. Their reputation is built over time through presence. Healing rituals also address imbalance beyond the individual. Conflict, grief, disconnection. Sometimes illness is understood as a symptom of something larger. I think about how often we treat stress-related illness today without addressing the conditions that create stress. Ritual healing looks outward as well as inward. There may be reconciliation involved, apologies offered, tensions acknowledged, relationships repaired. Healing is not always about the body alone. As strength returns, responsibilities gradually resume. not all at once. The community adjusts expectations carefully. Healing is integrated rather than declared complete. Today, we often rush back into productivity the moment symptoms ease. Ritual allows for gradual re-entry. It respects fragility. There is often a closing gesture, a final bath, a shared meal, a quiet acknowledgement that balance has returned, at least for now. This closing is not dramatic. It is subtle. The absence of illness is not celebrated loudly. Health is treated as the baseline, not the achievement. I think about how strange this feels to modern sensibilities. We celebrate recovery milestones. We announce health as victory. Ritual sees health as harmony restored. As night settles after healing work, there is a softness in the air. Relief mixed with gratitude. No grand speeches, just quiet presence. The body rests differently. There is trust again. Trust in sensation. Trust in breath. Trust in the community that held space during vulnerability. Ritual healing does not promise permanence. Illness may return. Life remains unpredictable, but it offers something durable, a way of responding that honors complexity. As I sit with this understanding, I feel how deeply we miss this approach. How often we long to be seen as whole rather than as a set of symptoms. We try to recreate it in fragments.
Wellness-Routines. Mindfulness apps.
Self-care rituals performed alone. These gestures point toward something real, even if they fall short. Ritual reminds us that healing is not a solo project. It is a communal practice grounded in attention, patience, and care. The fire burns low again. The space feels settled. There is no urgency to move on. Healing has its own tempo. In the quiet, the body breathes steadily. The mind loosens its grip. Balance, for now, has been restored. There is a certain kind of fear that arrives without warning. Not the sharp fear of an immediate threat, but the deeper kind that settles in the chest when the world feels unstable. When patterns break, when something unknown looms just beyond the edge of understanding. Rituals of protection were shaped for these moments. Protection was never about sealing oneself off from the world. It was about alignment, about ensuring that the individual, the community, and the unseen forces they believed in were moving together rather than against one another. Fear, in this context, was not an enemy. It was a signal. I imagine someone sensing that something is wrong. The animals are quieter than usual. The weather behaves strangely. Dreams become vivid and unsettling. These signs are noticed, not dismissed. Attention sharpens. Today, we are trained to override intuition, to rationalize discomfort, to keep moving. We often sense danger emotionally long before we can name it, and yet we scroll past that feeling as if it were a minor inconvenience. Ritual insisted on stopping to listen. Protective rituals often began with acknowledgement, naming the fear, speaking it aloud. This alone reduces its power. Fear thrives in silence. Ritual brings it into the open.
Imagine a circle forming.
Not dramatically, but naturally. People gathering because they know something needs to be addressed. No one pretends everything is fine. There is relief in this honesty. Words are spoken carefully, not to incite panic, but to clarify. What has been noticed? What feels off? What is being asked for? In modern life, we rarely create space for collective fear. We process it privately or broadcast it chaotically. Ritual provides structure, contains fear so it does not spill everywhere. Protective gestures often involve the body. Markings, paint, objects worn or carried. These are not decorations. They are reminders, anchors for attention. I think about how today we carry objects for comfort. Lucky charms, jewelry given by someone important. Phones themselves function this way. We reach for them reflexively when anxious. The instinct is the same. Ritual objects work because they focus the mind. They say, remember this, remember who you are, remember that you are not alone. Movement is also central. Walking a perimeter, tracing boundaries, dancing patterns that have been repeated so often they feel embedded in the ground itself. These actions create a sense of order. Anyone who has ever paced to calm themselves understands this. Movement organizes thought. Ritual formalizes it. There are often spoken elements, chants, prayers, words repeated not because they are magical in themselves, but because repetition steadies the mind. It slows breath. It aligns intention. I imagine the rhythm building gradually, not overwhelming, just enough to draw attention away from spiraling thoughts. Fear narrows perception. Ritual widens it again. Protection rituals also reinforce social bonds. Standing together matters. Facing outward together matters. It communicates solidarity not just to unseen forces, but to one another. Today, we often face fear alone, even when surrounded by others. We wear competence like armor. Ritual allows vulnerability without loss of dignity. There is also an acceptance embedded in these practices. Protection does not mean control. It means readiness, the understanding that not everything can be prevented, but much can be met with preparation. This is a subtle but crucial distinction. Modern culture often promises safety through control, security systems, predictive algorithms, insurance against every imaginable outcome. Ritual offers something different. Resilience. There may be offerings involved. Food, objects, time. These are gestures of respect rather than transactions. They acknowledge relationship rather than demand outcome. I think about how transactional our approach to safety has become. We pay for protection. We expect guarantees. Ritual understands that the world does not work that way. There is often a moment of silence within protective rituals. A pause that feels heavy at first, then grounding. Silence allows fear to surface without amplification. This is difficult for modern minds. We fill silence instinctively. We fear what might emerge. Ritual teaches sitting with discomfort without trying to fix it immediately. Children are often present during these rituals. Not shielded, but included. Fear is not hidden from them. It is contextualized, shown as something that can be addressed collectively. I think about how today we often try to protect children by pretending fear does not exist. Then they encounter it alone without tools. Ritual offers tools early. There is also humor even here, gentle teasing, a light comment to break tension. Laughter does not negate seriousness. It releases pressure. I imagine someone making a small joke at just the right moment, causing shoulders to drop. The body relaxes. Fear loosens its grip. Protection rituals are not one-time events. They are repeated as needed, before journeys, before conflict, before uncertain transitions. Repetition builds confidence. Today, we often face uncertainty unprepared. We react rather than respond. Ritual gives practice. It rehearses courage. There is also an inward dimension. Protection is not only about external threats. It is about guarding one's own balance, avoiding internal fragmentation. I think about how often we feel overwhelmed today, pulled in too many directions. Protective rituals help recenter attention. They say, focus here, now. As the ritual concludes, there is not a sense of victory. There is calm, readiness, a quiet confidence that whatever comes will be met together. The world does not suddenly become safe, but it becomes intelligible again. Fear no longer dominates the landscape. It takes its proper place as one signal among many. Night settles differently after protection rituals. There is a sense of being held, not invincible but supported. Sleep comes with less tension. I think about how much of our modern anxiety stems from feeling alone with our fears. Even when we talk about them, we often do so without structure or closure. Ritual provides both. It gives fear a beginning, a middle, and an end. It says, we have acknowledged this. We have done what we can. Now we rest. This does not eliminate danger. It transforms relationship to danger. Fear becomes something to engage rather than something to avoid. As I sit with this understanding, I realize how often we still seek this kind of protection. We create routines. We repeat affirmations. We seek community during crisis. These instincts point back towards something ancient and wise. A recognition that humans are not meant to face uncertainty alone. The fire burns steady. The air feels quieter. There is no guarantee of tomorrow's ease, but there is trust in tonight's stillness. And in that stillness, protection has done its work. There are times when the world demands courage, not the loud kind that announces itself, but the steady kind that carries you forward even when fear is still present. Rituals surrounding conflict and bravery were shaped for these moments, not to glorify violence, but to prepare the mind and spirit for the weight of responsibility that comes with facing danger. Bravery was never understood as the absence of fear. That idea is a modern fantasy, usually sold by movies that cut away from the aftermath. Ritual understood fear as a companion, something that walks alongside you, whispering warnings, sharpening awareness. The goal was not to silence fear, but to keep it from taking control. I imagine the days leading up to conflict. The air feels heavier. Conversations are quieter. People notice small details more sharply. The way light falls, the way the wind shifts. This heightened attention is not panic. It is readiness. Today, we often stumble into stressful situations unprepared. A sudden argument, an unexpected crisis, a confrontation we did not see coming. We rely on adrenaline to carry us through, then wonder why we feel shaken afterward. Ritual offers preparation instead of surprise. Before facing danger, there are moments of gathering. Not to hype one another up, but to ground. Words are spoken slowly. Instructions are clear. Expectations are set. This clarity reduces chaos. I think about how today we often mistake intensity for readiness. We psych ourselves up. We consume motivational content. We tell ourselves not to be afraid. Ritual takes a different approach. It says, be afraid and stand anyway. There may be physical preparation involved. Painting the body, wearing specific items, not to intimidate others but to shift internal state. The body recognizes these cues. Posture changes. Breath deepens. Anyone who has ever put on a uniform or special clothing before an important task knows this effect. The clothes signal a role. Ritual uses this deliberately. Movement is also central. Exercises, dances, patterns repeated until they become automatic. This trains the body to respond without hesitation when the mind is overwhelmed. Today, many of us train our minds constantly but neglect the body. Ritual understands that under stress, the body leads. Training it matters. There are often moments of stillness before action, quiet that feels dense. This is not indecision. It is focus. I imagine standing together, breathing slowly, feeling the ground beneath bare feet. Awareness narrows to what matters. Distractions fall away. Modern life rarely offers this kind of stillness before challenge. We rush into meetings. We jump into arguments mid-scroll. We face conflict already scattered. Ritual insists on centering first. There is also acknowledgement of consequence. Ritual does not pretend that conflict is clean or simple. There are words spoken about responsibility, about restraint, about returning. This matters deeply. Without acknowledgement of consequence, bravery becomes recklessness. Ritual draws a boundary between the two. I think about how today we often celebrate boldness without discussing impact. We admire those who charge forward without hesitation. Ritual respects those who pause to consider what comes after. Community presence is crucial here as well. No one faces danger solely for themselves. Actions are understood as affecting others. This awareness tempers ego. I imagine looking around and seeing familiar faces, knowing that what you do matters beyond your own survival. This is both grounding and heavy. Today, individualism often isolates courage. We frame bravery as personal achievement. Ritual frames it as service. There is also care for those who do not go forward. Elders, children, those unable to participate. Their protection is part of the purpose. This is often overlooked in modern narratives of courage. Ritual remembers who remains behind. After conflict, there are rituals of return. These are as important as preparation. They mark the transition back into ordinary life. I imagine someone coming back changed, not necessarily visibly injured, but altered. The community does not expect immediate normalcy. Space is given. Today, we often expect people to bounce back quickly, to compartmentalize, to resume productivity. Ritual refuses this demand. There may be cleansing involved, washing away not just dirt, but emotional residue. Water again plays a role, resetting the body. Sound returns here as well. Songs that soothe rather than energize. Stories that contextualize what happened. These stories are not about glory. They are about meaning, about lessons learned, about honoring those affected. I think about how today we process conflict through endless commentary. Opinions layered on top of raw experience. Ritual offers integration instead. There is also grief. Even when outcomes are favorable, loss exists. Loss of innocence, loss of certainty, loss of what was before. Ritual makes room for this. It does not rush past it in the name of strength. I imagine sitting quietly, feeling exhaustion settle in. The body heavy, the mind slow. This is not weakness. It is truth. Humor returns slowly, carefully, not immediately. Laughter after conflict has a different texture. It is softer, more grateful. This timing matters. Too soon and it feels dismissive. Too late and tension hardens. Ritual holds this balance. There is also recognition, not celebration in the modern sense, but acknowledgement. A look, a word, a shared understanding that something difficult was faced. Today, recognition often comes through public praise. Ritual recognition is quieter. It affirms without inflating. As night settles, sleep comes differently. Dreams may be vivid. Memories replay. Ritual does not pathologize this. It expects it. The community remains attentive, not hovering but aware. Support is offered without being demanded. I think about how today we often leave people alone with their aftermath. We admire courage from a distance, then move on. Ritual stays. There is also teaching embedded in these experiences. Younger members observe. Not the action itself, but the preparation and return. They learn that courage includes care, that bravery includes reflection, that strength includes vulnerability. These lessons are subtle but durable. They shape how future challenges will be met. As I reflect on this, I feel how deeply this approach contrasts with our modern obsession with spectacle. We focus on the moment of action and ignore everything surrounding it. Ritual understands that the moment is only a small part of the story. The fire burns low again. The air is quiet. There is no triumph in the silence. Only a steady sense of having passed through something together. And in that shared passage, courage has been transformed from a performance into a practice. There are moments when the year itself seems to breathe, not in the sharp inhale of sudden change, but in the long, slow exhale of seasons turning as they always have. Rituals tied to cycles were born from this breathing world, shaped by repetition so deep that time itself felt circular rather than linear. I imagine living without calendars, without reminders popping up to tell you what month it is. The knowledge of time lives instead in the body, in the angle of the sun, in the smell of the air, in the way mornings feel cooler or warmer than they did before. The year announces itself through sensation. Seasonal rituals begin not on a date, but on a noticing. Someone points out that the days are shortening. Someone else mentions the return of a familiar bird. A child asks why the wind feels different. These observations gather weight until they form consensus. It is time. Today, we experience seasons mostly as background aesthetics. A filter change, a clothing shift, a themed drink. We acknowledge them briefly, then continue moving at the same pace year-round. Ritual refused this flattening. It asked people to slow or speed themselves to match the world around them. There is preparation involved. Certain foods are gathered, certain tools brought out, certain spaces cleaned or rearranged. Not in a frantic way, but in a deliberate one. The body is eased into the transition. I think about how jarring seasonal change can feel now. One day it is warm, the next cold, and we barely register it beyond discomfort. Ritual softens these edges. It provides a buffer, a way to say goodbye to what is passing and welcome what is coming. Harvest rituals are among the most vivid. They are not simply about abundance. They are about relief, the quiet exhale after months of effort, the recognition that survival has been secured for now. I imagine hands moving quickly, practiced, laughter rising easily, the air filled with the smell of food being prepared. There is joy here, but also exhaustion. Both are allowed. Today, abundance often feels abstract. We see numbers rather than full stores. We buy without remembering effort. Ritual harvest insists on remembrance. Says this came from work. This came from patience. This came from the land's cooperation. There is gratitude woven through these moments, not as a polite gesture, but as grounding. Gratitude keeps abundance from turning into entitlement. I think about how easily we slide into expectation today. How quickly abundance becomes baseline rather than gift. Ritual resists this erosion. There are songs sung that are only sung at this time. Movements performed that belong to this moment alone. Their rarity gives them power. The body remembers them from year to year, even if the mind forgets. This exclusivity is intentional. If everything is always available, nothing feels special. Ritual understands restraint. Winter rituals carry a different energy. Inward, quieter. The world contracts, and so does attention. Survival becomes about conservation rather than expansion. I imagine fires burning longer, stories stretching out, time loosening its grip, the pace of life slowing naturally rather than through force. Today we fight winter. We light it aggressively. We heat it away. We insist on constant productivity. Ritual embraces winter's invitation to rest. There is teaching embedded here. Learning to be still without becoming stagnant. Learning to wait without despair. I think about how uncomfortable stillness has become for us. How quickly we label rest as laziness. Ritual reframes it as wisdom. Spring rituals arrive gently. They do not rush. They test the ground carefully. They acknowledge fragility. New life is welcomed, but not assumed. I imagine small ceremonies, simple gestures, seeds placed into soil with intention. The understanding that not everything will grow, and that this is part of the process. Today, we expect immediate results. We plant metaphorical seeds and check for progress instantly. Ritual teaches patience. There is hope here, but it is cautious, earned, grounded. Summer rituals are expansive. Energy returns. Movement increases. Social life opens outward. These rituals often involve gathering beyond the immediate community. I imagine larger circles, new faces, shared experiences that strengthen alliances, celebration that feels earned rather than indulgent. Today, we often seek stimulation rather than celebration. We fill time rather than mark it. Ritual celebration feels different, carries memory. Throughout all these cycles, there is an awareness of impermanence. No season is permanent. No state lasts forever. Ritual does not cling. It flows. This awareness shapes emotional life. Joy is enjoyed fully because it is known to be temporary. Hardship is endured because it is known to pass. I think about how often we resist this truth today. How we grasp at joy, fearing its loss, and panic during hardship, fearing its permanence. Ritual offers a steadier relationship with change. There are also rituals tied to celestial cycles, the movement of stars, the phases of the moon. These patterns provide a larger frame of reference. I imagine standing under a night sky unmarred by artificial light. The stars are not decoration. They are guides, teachers, timekeepers. Today, many of us rarely look up. We track time on screens rather than in the sky. Ritual reconnects time to the cosmos. Moon rituals, in particular, align emotion with rhythm. The waxing and waning mirrored in energy and mood. There is permission to ebb as well as flow. I think about how rigid we expect ourselves to be now. Consistent output, stable mood, constant availability. Ritual allows fluctuation. These cycles also structure memory. Events are remembered in relation to seasons rather than dates. The winter when this happened, the summer when that changed. This anchors memory in experience rather than abstraction. It makes life feel storied rather than segmented. Ritual cycles also regulate conflict. There are times for dispute and times for rest. Times when tensions are addressed and times when they are set aside. Today, conflict is constant, always available, always present. Ritual creates boundaries, says now is not the time. There is relief in this containment. Not everything must be dealt with immediately. Timing matters. Children grow up absorbing these rhythms. They learn when to expect intensity and when to expect calm. Their nervous systems are shaped accordingly. I think about how overstimulated many children are now, how little rhythm structures their lives. Ritual offers predictability without rigidity. There is also humility embedded in seasonal rituals. Humans are not in charge. The land is not obedient. Cooperation is required. This humility tempers arrogance, fosters respect. Today, we often assume control. Technology gives the illusion of dominance. Ritual reminds us of dependence. As seasons turn year after year, rituals accumulate meaning. They carry memory of past seasons, past joys, past losses. Each repetition is layered. I imagine performing a gesture learned in childhood, now carrying decades of experience. The body remembers differently. The meaning deepens. This continuity provides comfort. It says, you have been here before. You will be here again. Today, many of our rituals are disposable. Trends that come and go. Traditions invented and abandoned quickly. Ritual endurance matters. As the cycle completes, there is no sense of finish, only continuation. The end of one season is the beginning of another. This circularity shapes worldview. Life is not a straight line toward an endpoint. It is a series of returns. I think about how differently this frames aging. Aging is not decline, but movement through cycles. Each stage carries its own role. This perspective softens fear of time. It invites participation rather than resistance. As night settles within this understanding, there is a deep calm. The world feels trustworthy again, not because it is predictable, but because it is patterned. The fire reflects this rhythm, burning, dimming, being fed again. It does not worry about tomorrow. It responds to now. Ritual aligns humans with this simplicity. It teaches us to live within cycles rather than against them. And in that alignment, there is rest. There comes a moment when the circle tightens, not in fear, not in celebration, but in recognition. Someone is gone or going. Death rituals grow out of this moment, not as an attempt to make loss tidy, but as a way to keep it from tearing everything apart. I imagine the first sign is subtle. Someone does not wake. Someone does not answer. A stillness lingers where movement used to be. No one rushes to fill the silence. The silence is information. Today, death often arrives wrapped in procedures, notifications, phone calls that begin with careful phrasing. We are ushered quickly into logistics, decisions, paperwork, timelines. There is very little space to simply notice that something irreversible has occurred. Ritual insisted on that noticing. The body of the deceased is not hidden away immediately. It is acknowledged, seen, touched, cared for, not because this is easy, but because avoidance does not make loss smaller. Ritual brings death into view so it can be integrated rather than feared. I imagine people gathering quietly, movements slow, voices low. No one is performing grief correctly. There is no script. Some cry openly. Some sit in silence. Some feel nothing at all, and that too is allowed. This allowance matters deeply. Grief does not follow instructions. Ritual does not attempt to control it. It provides structure so emotion can move without becoming overwhelming. There are often rituals of washing and preparation. The body is cleaned gently, not as a chore but as an act of respect. Hands move with care. Attention is focused. Today, many of us are shielded from this intimacy. Professionals handle the body. Efficiency replaces presence. Ritual understood that tending to the dead is also tending to the living. This contact grounds grief, prevents denial from hardening, says this is real and you are still here. There may be adornment, clothing chosen with intention, objects placed nearby. These are not attempts to decorate death. They are expressions of relationship. I think about how today we often express grief through objects after the fact. Flowers sent, posts written. Ritual integrates these gestures into the process itself. Sound plays a role here as well. Songs sung slowly, words spoken softly, not to explain death, but to accompany it. The voice changes when speaking to the dead. It becomes quieter, more deliberate, less concerned with being understood by others. I imagine someone speaking words meant only for the one who has passed. Not for closure, but for continuity. Relationship does not end abruptly. It shifts. Modern culture often pushes for closure, a clean ending. Ritual resists this. It allows bonds to transform rather than disappear. There is often a period of sitting with the body. Time stretches. People come and go. Stories emerge organically. These stories are not eulogies in the modern sense. They are memories, fragments, moments that surface unexpectedly. Some are funny, some are awkward, some are deeply tender. Laughter appears here too, sometimes startlingly. Not because grief has ended, but because memory is complex. Ritual allows this complexity without judgment. I think about how today laughter during mourning can feel inappropriate. We police our emotions. Ritual trusts them. Food appears eventually, not immediately. There is a rhythm to this. Hunger returns gradually. Eating together marks a return to the body. This matters. Grief can pull people out of physical awareness. Ritual gently anchors them back. I imagine sharing simple food. Nothing elaborate. Nourishment without spectacle. The act of eating together is itself a ritual of survival. Children are present here too. They are not excluded. Death is not hidden from them. It is contextualized. They ask questions, sometimes blunt ones. Answers are given honestly, without unnecessary detail. Ritual does not lie to protect comfort. It trusts that children can sense truth anyway. I think about how today we often shield children from death, then struggle to help them when they encounter it later without tools. Ritual introduces mortality gradually, as part of life rather than its negation. There are rituals of mourning that extend beyond the immediate moment. Periods of altered behavior, clothing choices, restrictions on certain activities. These are not punishments. They are signals. They tell the community something has changed here. Today, grief is often invisible. We are expected to resume normal function quickly. Ritual gives permission to move differently for a while. Time behaves differently during mourning. Days blur, nights stretch. Ritual provides markers within this distortion. Certain actions are repeated, certain words spoken. These repetitions create stability when everything else feels unstable. I think about how lost people can feel after a death, not just emotionally, but temporally. Ritual gives time a shape again. There are also rituals of remembrance. Not immediately, not before grief has space to unfold. Later, when memory can be held without being overwhelming. Stories are told again, names spoken, lessons recalled. The deceased becomes an ancestor rather than an absence. This transition matters. It allows the dead to remain part of the community in a different way. I imagine speaking of someone who has passed not with pain, but with warmth. Not because loss is forgotten, but because it has been integrated. Modern remembrance often feels sporadic. Anniversaries remembered or forgotten. Ritual creates continuity. It weaves memory into regular life. There may be places associated with the dead. A tree, path, a spot where presence feels strong. These places are revisited. Returning to these places is not about dwelling in grief. It is about acknowledging ongoing relationship. I think about how today we sometimes avoid places associated with loss. Ritual invites gentle return. There are also rituals that address fear of death itself. Stories about what comes after. Beliefs varied widely, but the purpose was similar. To reduce terror, not to eliminate mystery, but to frame it. Death rituals often emphasize continuity, the idea that life moves on not despite death, but through it. This perspective does not remove sadness, contextualizes it. I imagine sitting by a fire after burial or final rites. The intensity has passed. A quiet exhaustion settles in. There is no expectation to feel better, only to rest. This rest is communal. People remain nearby. No one is left alone unless they choose to be. Today, we often leave mourners alone quickly. We offer condolences, then step back. Ritual stays. There is also care for practical matters. Belongings redistributed. Responsibilities adjusted. The community absorbs the gap left behind. This prevents secondary losses. Grief is heavy enough without logistical chaos. I think about how today death often leaves people overwhelmed by tasks. Ritual distributes this load. There is acknowledgement that grief will return unexpectedly. There is no timeline imposed. Ritual prepares for waves. This acceptance is deeply compassionate. It says, you are not failing when grief resurfaces. You are human. Over time, mourning rituals soften. Ritual resolves this by framing life as continuation rather than replacement. Death rituals also teach the living how they will one day be mourned. They model care. They show what matters. This awareness shapes behavior. It encourages accountability, relationship. As I reflect on this, I feel how deeply we miss these practices. How death frightens us partly because we have stripped it of structure. We invent substitutes, memorial posts, moments of silence at inconvenient times. These gestures point towards something real, even if they feel insufficient. Ritual does not make death easy. It makes it survivable. The fire burns low again. The night is quiet. The space feels held. In this stillness, death is not an intruder. It is a presence acknowledged, integrated, respected. And in that acknowledgement, life continues, shaped by memory rather than shadowed by fear. There is a quieter kind of ritual that does not announce itself with gathering or song. It happens in small spaces, often unnoticed, carried out by individuals rather than the whole community. These are the rituals of everyday balance, the ones that keep a person aligned long after ceremonies end. I imagine someone waking before others, not out of obligation, but out of habit. The light is dim, the air still cool. There is a small moment of stillness before the day begins. No one is watching. That is part of the point. Personal rituals were never meant to impress. They were meant to steady. Today, we often think of ritual as something that requires an audience. If it is not shared or documented, it feels unreal. Personal ritual rejects this logic. Its power comes from privacy. These practices might involve simple actions. Washing hands in a particular way, speaking certain words quietly, touching the earth, facing a specific direction when the sun rises. None of these actions are dramatic. That is why they work. I think about how today many people struggle to start their day without checking their phone. The first act becomes consumption. Personal ritual offers an alternative. A moment of intention before information floods in. These rituals serve as anchors. They remind the individual who they are before the world makes demands. This identity is not abstract. It is embodied. Breath plays a central role. Slow breathing, conscious breathing, not framed as a technique but as attention. Breath connects mind and body without effort. Anyone who has paused to take a deep breath during stress understands this instinctively. Ritual formalizes what the body already knows. There are rituals tied to emotional regulation as well. Ways of responding to anger, to frustration, to sadness. These responses are practiced before they are needed. I imagine someone feeling anger rise and choosing a familiar action instead of reaction. Stepping away, touching water, speaking a phrase learned long ago. Today, we often encounter emotions for the first time in the moment they overwhelm us. Ritual gives rehearsal. It reduces surprise. There are also rituals of gratitude practiced privately. Quiet acknowledgments, not shared publicly, not framed as virtue signaling. These acknowledgments keep entitlement in check. They recalibrate perspective. I think about how often we chase gratitude today through lists and reminders, turning it into another task. Ritual gratitude is not measured. It is felt. Personal rituals also mark internal transitions. The end of a relationship, the acceptance of a loss, the decision to change direction. These moments may not be visible to others. Ritual makes them visible to oneself. I imagine someone standing alone, performing a simple gesture that marks an ending. Not because anyone else needs to know, but because the psyche does. Today, many internal transitions go unmarked. We move on externally while remaining stuck internally. Ritual creates closure where none exists socially. There are also rituals of listening, moments when one deliberately seeks silence, not to escape noise, but to hear what arises beneath it. This kind of listening is rare now. We fill every gap. Silence feels suspicious. Ritual trains comfort with quiet. I think about how many insights arrive only when the mind is not being fed constantly. Ritual protects this space. Personal rituals often involve repetition at specific times. Before sleep, after waking, before journeys, after difficult conversations. These repetitions create rhythm within the individual, even when external life is chaotic. Today, our schedules shift constantly. Flexibility is praised, but it can erode stability. Personal ritual provides consistency without rigidity. There is also play involved. Ritual does not have to be solemn. Some personal rituals are playful, humorous, slightly absurd. I imagine someone performing a gesture that would look strange to others, smiling to themselves. The ritual works precisely because it is personal. Today, we often feel pressure to justify our habits, to explain why they matter. Ritual does not require explanation. There are also rituals tied to craftsmanship, how tools are handled, how work begins and ends. These rituals protect focus. I think about how often we jump into tasks mid-distraction. Ritual entry into work creates clarity. Ending rituals matter too. Closing the day deliberately, letting go of effort, signaling to the body that it is safe to rest. Today, many people carry the day into the night. Thoughts loop. Sleep resists. Ritual ending gives permission to stop. These practices are learned through observation, watching elders, not through instruction manuals. They are adaptable. They evolve with the individual. What works at one stage may shift at another. This adaptability is crucial. Ritual is not rigid tradition. It is living practice. Personal rituals also serve as quiet resistance. Resistance to constant acceleration, to external definition, to loss of self. I think about how often people today feel fragmented, pulled between roles. Ritual gathers these fragments gently. There is also resilience here. When larger rituals are disrupted, personal rituals remain. They are portable. This portability matters in times of upheaval, displacement, change, loss of community. I imagine someone carrying a small ritual into unfamiliar territory, a piece of continuity amid disruption. Today, many people create rituals unconsciously for this reason. Comfort shows, favorite routines, repeated actions that soothe. Ritual invites consciousness into this process. It allows intention to replace compulsion. There is also humility in personal ritual. It acknowledges limits. It says, I cannot control everything, but I can attend to this. This sense of agency is subtle but powerful. As I sit with this understanding, I realize how deeply personal ritual shapes character. It does not demand perfection. It asks for consistency. Over time, these small practices accumulate. They shape response. Ritual reminds us that meaning is often built quietly. No one applauds personal ritual. That is its strength. As night settles, personal rituals guide the transition into rest. The same gesture, the same sequence. Familiar. The body relaxes in anticipation. The mind loosens. Sleep arrives not as collapse, but as continuation. In this quiet space, it becomes clear that ritual is not something added to life. It is the thread that holds it together when everything else shifts. And in tending to that thread, day after day, a person learns how to remain whole in a world that constantly pulls them apart. There is a moment when the circle loosens, not because it is breaking, but because it has done its work. The energy shifts from holding, teaching, protecting, and remembering toward something quieter and harder to name. Integration, the way ritual lives on after the fire goes out, after the songs fade, after the people disperse back into ordinary life. This is where ritual proves what it truly is. Not an event, not a performance, not a special occasion carved out from real life, but a way of carrying the world inside the body, long after the visible structure disappears. I imagine waking on a morning that feels entirely ordinary. No ceremony planned, no gathering expected. The light comes in the same way it always does. The body rises. The day begins. And yet something is different. Not dramatically, not in a way that would impress anyone else. But internally, there is coherence. Ritual leaves traces. It changes how attention moves, how choices are made, how discomfort is interpreted. It alters reaction time, not just in the physical sense, but in the emotional one. There is more space between feeling and action, more room to choose response instead of reflex. Today, we often treat meaning as something external, something to find, something to chase, something to manufacture through goals, productivity, identity. Ritual works differently. It embeds meaning into the nervous system. You do not have to think about it. It is already there. I imagine someone encountering a difficult moment, an argument, a loss, an unexpected change. The old panic tries to rise, but it does not take over completely. Something steadies it. Not positivity, not denial, familiarity. The body recognizes this moment as something that has been prepared for, even if it has never happened in exactly this form before. This is one of ritual's quiet powers. Prepares without predicting. Modern life often overwhelms because everything feels unprecedented. Every stressor framed as urgent, every problem as singular. Ritual teaches pattern recognition. This has happened before in some form. It will happen again. You are not alone in it. Integration also shows up in how people relate to one another. Conversations slow slightly. Listening deepens. Not always, not perfectly, but more often than before. I think about how rushed our interactions have become. How often we listen only to respond. How rare it is to be fully present without multitasking. Ritual trains presence through repetition rather than instruction. You cannot lecture someone into attentiveness. You can only practice it into being. Humor survives here too. In fact, it thrives. Integrated ritual does not produce solemn people. Produces grounded ones. People who can see absurdity without losing meaning. I imagine someone laughing at a stressful situation, not because it is trivial, but because panic no longer feels necessary. Laughter becomes perspective. Today, humor is often defensive, sarcasm as armor. Ritual humor is connective. It releases tension without severing care. Integration also reshapes time perception. Days feel fuller, not because more is happening, but because attention is not constantly fragmented. I think about how often people say time is speeding up, that life feels like it is slipping by. Ritual slows time not by adding hours, but by deepening moments. A meal becomes a meal again. Not content consumed between tasks, but a pause with weight. A walk becomes an encounter rather than exercise. Rest becomes restoration rather than collapse. These shifts are subtle. They do not announce themselves. That is why they last. Ritual also integrates loss differently. Grief still hurts. Absence still aches. But loss is held within a framework that allows movement rather than paralysis. I imagine someone remembering a loved one who has passed. The memory brings sadness, yes, but also warmth. There is no rush to push it away. Today, grief is often something to get over or manage. Ritual reframes it as something to carry well. Integration also affects how people face uncertainty. The future remains unknown. That does not change. What changes is relationship to not knowing. There is less urgency to control outcomes, more trust in process. I think about how exhausting it is to constantly brace for the worst, to treat every unknown as a threat. Ritual trains tolerance for ambiguity. This tolerance is not passive. It is alert without being frantic. Work changes too, not necessarily in form, but in quality. Effort becomes more focused, less scattered. There is a clearer sense of when to push and when to stop. Today, burnout often comes from ignoring internal signals. Ritual amplifies those signals. It teaches listening before damage accumulates. I imagine someone noticing fatigue earlier, choosing rest without guilt, returning to effort without resentment. This balance is rare in modern culture. Integration also strengthens boundaries, not rigid walls, but discernment, knowing when to engage and when to step back. I think about how porous many people feel now, constantly accessible, always on. Ritual reclaims sovereignty over attention. Saying no becomes easier not because of assertiveness training, but because values are clearer. Community looks different too. Relationships deepen, not necessarily in number, but in reliability. Ritual does not create constant togetherness. It creates dependable connection, knowing who will show up when it matters. Today, we often confuse connectivity with community. Messages exchanged do not always translate to presence. Ritual insists on embodiment. Integration also shapes leadership. Leaders formed by ritual are less performative, less reactive, more grounded. They do not need to dominate space to be felt. Their steadiness carries authority. I think about how much leadership today relies on volume, on constant signaling. Ritual leadership is quieter. It listens first. It responds deliberately. Conflict, when it arises, is approached differently. Less escalation, more curiosity, not because conflict disappears, but because it is contextualized. I imagine disagreement unfolding without immediate collapse into threat. There is space to breathe inside tension. This is not idealism. It is practice. Integration also shows up in solitude. Being alone no longer feels like absence. It feels like presence with oneself. I think about how many people today fear being alone with their thoughts. Ritual trains that capacity gently. Solitude becomes a resource rather than a void. There is also humility here. Integrated ritual does not produce certainty. It produces comfort with not having final answers. This humility prevents dogma, keeps ritual alive rather than fossilized. I imagine someone encountering a belief different from their own and listening without defensiveness. Curiosity replaces threat. This openness matters deeply in a plural world. Integration also protects against despair, not by denying hardship, but by placing it within a larger pattern. Suffering does not become meaningless. It becomes contextual. I think about how often despair today comes from isolation, feeling like pain is personal failure rather than human condition. Ritual dissolves this illusion. Life is still hard, but it is shared. There is also beauty in this integration. Beauty noticed in small things, light through leaves, smoke rising, silence settling. These moments are not consumed. They are received. I think about how often beauty today becomes content, something to capture, something to share. Ritual teaches beauty as nourishment rather than currency. Integration also shapes legacy, not in grand achievements, but in patterns passed on unconsciously. A way of listening, a way of responding, a way of resting. These are inherited quietly. I imagine a child watching an adult handle frustration calmly, not because they were taught to, but because they absorbed it. This is how ritual survives across generations. It does not require preservation in museums. It lives in bodies. As time passes, rituals may change form.
Songs Alter.
Gestures shift. Context evolves. What remains is not exact replication, but orientation. Orientation toward attention, toward care, toward relationship. This flexibility keeps ritual alive. I think about how fragile rigid tradition can be, how easily it shatters under pressure. Living ritual adapts. Integration also means knowing when ritual is not needed, when spontaneity can lead, when structure can loosen. This discernment prevents ritual from becoming compulsive. Ritual is a tool, not a cage. As night settles again, without ceremony, without announcement, the day closes. The body recognizes familiar cues. The mind unwinds. Sleep arrives naturally, not because everything is resolved, but because nothing is being resisted. In this rest, the quiet truth becomes clear. Ritual was never about controlling the world. It was about learning how to live inside it without being torn apart by its uncertainty. It taught people how to pay attention, how to endure, how to celebrate, how to grieve, how to belong, how to let go. And when all of that is integrated, ritual no longer needs to be visible to be present. It moves invisibly through breath, posture, timing, and care. The fire does not need to burn brightly to give warmth. Embers are enough, and in that steady, quiet glow, life continues. Thank you once again for tuning into this episode of Background Historian. Rest now, and I will see you in the next one.